squeeze on taxes. So which is the best way to go? Doug Hyde is the communications director for the Republican National Committee, and Brad Woodhouse is the communications director for the Democratic National Committee. It doesn't get any more fair and balanced than that. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on together. This should be fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan.
Doug, I want to start with you because we watched President Obama for 50 minutes on this program yesterday, outlining some of his economic proposals and really taking aim at Minority Leader John Boehner and saying really the Republicans have no plan, and essentially what they want to do is take us back to what they did before, which is, he said, is to get us into this mess, that they just want to revert to the olden days, which is how we wound up here. Your thoughts?
You know, let's talk about the olden days for a little bit. We'll talk about the early 1960s. Our friends at the Winston Group, a great polling company here in town, put out a video yesterday featuring a Democrat. His name was John F. Kennedy, president of our country, who called for tax cuts, said the only way to grow revenue, the only way to reduce debt and deficit is to cut taxes. That's a message Republicans agree with now. It's one we wish we would hear from the Democrats. But what we heard from the president is, on the one hand, he believes in lean government. On the other hand, he wants to spend another $50 billion. It's why you see so many Democrats fleeing from the president, not wanting to campaign with him. And I'll tell you just briefly, being from North Carolina, Brad's from North Carolina too, we saw a poll this week that demonstrated how toxic the president and his policies are. North Carolina icon Andy Griffith, his poll numbers are down 25 points because he associated himself with Obamacare. And I tell you, if this president can tear down the popularity of a beloved icon in my home state, it's no wonder that Democrats are fleeing from him every chance.
I'm going to get Brad. I am definitely going to get to you in 1 minute. I just want to follow up on one thing. So tax cuts. JFK wanted tax cuts. Great. President Obama wants tax cuts as well. He just doesn't want them for the richest Americans, for the richest 2% of Americans, the people making over $250,000 a year. He says they don't need it, and when you give it to them, they don't spend it, and so it doesn't stimulate the economy. Why can't the two parties agree at least on that?
Well, what we see is there's actually a lot of agreement. More and more Democrats, Senator Ben Nelson from Nebraska today said, you know what, we shouldn't raise any taxes. That's actually a position that President Obama had at least espoused earlier when he said it would be foolish to raise taxes in a recession. We think that was the right policy, and we just want to move forward. Keep spending in check and keep taxes where they are right now.
Brad,
if we can't lower them at least.
Brad, I'll give you the chance.
Can we just start with a history lesson here? First of all, it was the Republicans that put in place the expiration of these tax cuts. It was President Bush. It was a Republican Congress. So the extent that anybody's taxes changes, it's going to be a result of policies that they put in place.
Oh, but you know, you could vote. The Democrats in the House and the Senate could vote to change this, and President Obama could sign it.
Well, certainly they could, Megan. But let's get to the crux of it. Why did they put an expiration of these tax cuts in place? They were trying to mask how much that they exploded the deficit, which is exactly what they did. I mean, look, it's wrong to say that the president's policies are to increase spending and increase taxes. Just this week, he's proposed to extend the research and development tax credit to make it permanent, $100 billion. He's proposed tax breaks for companies that invest in plant and equipment to help create jobs. What the Republicans want to do is extend tax breaks to the rich by borrowing money from China.
They want to extend tax breaks to everybody. That's what they say. Everybody across the board. Why not do that? Brad, why not extend the tax breaks across the board 2 years? Even Pete Orszag, the president's former budget director, just had an op-ed saying that's the deal that should be struck. Extend it for everybody for 2 years.
Well, first of all, I don't understand why people believe that this president should be held to the policies of the previous president that drove the economy into the ditch. He's proposing new tax cuts. He's proposing tax breaks for small businesses, for the middle class. Why should we have to go with the policies that didn't do anything to help the economy?
And I'll get back to you in 1 second, Doug. But that's not going with the policies of President Bush. It's doing something that this president's own budget director, who just left, said is the deal that should be cut. And as Doug points out, you've got Ben Nelson, you've got Joe Lieberman, you've got Evan Bayh, and you've got others now coming out. Ken Conrad saying extend the tax cuts for everybody. Why not, Brad?
Well, I'll tell you why not. Because we're in a situation here that was left by the Republicans. We had a $234 trillion or billion dollar budget surplus that Bush inherited from Clinton that became a $1.3 trillion deficit. Now, on top of it, they now want to extend at $700 billion tax breaks for the wealthy. Under Mr. Boehner's plan, he would increase the debt by trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. He's proposed about $100 billion in spending cuts, and he's proposing $700 billion
Doug,
in additional deficit
Doug,
spending.
the economists do say that if we extend those tax breaks for the so-called rich over the 250,000 level, it's going to cost us $700 billion in the next decade, when we already have our debt went from 10 trillion to 13 trillion just in the last 18 months. We need that $700 billion. Why shouldn't we get it from the so-called rich?
Well, we want to make sure that the economy grows, and I'll point out an economist again. I like talking about Democrats. Robert Reich last week was on television, looked at the jobs numbers and said there's no silver lining, that the prognosis was bleak. But Megan, I got some exciting news for you here. I think we've just got some bipartisan agreement. Brad and I may disagree about what Congressman Boehner, we certainly hope he'll be Speaker Boehner's proposal does, but Brad made it clear. Congressman Boehner has made a proposal. Republicans have put forth an idea. We've done it before. We placed it in the president's hand. We've introduced health care legislation, and now we know that Democrats are not ignoring our ideas. If they want to debate them, that's fine, but at least they concede the point. Republicans have put ideas on the table. We'll continue to do that.
You know, Brad, I look at this budget, and I'm no economist, but I do know this. If you have a
neither are we, Megan.
But if you have a friend or you have a family member who's a spender, right? Don't you have somebody like that in your family? They're a spender. They're constantly hitting you up for dough. You're giving them dough. They're a bottomless pit. No matter how much dough you give them, they're going to come back asking for more. They're not going to get fiscally responsible. It's really not the greatest idea to continue giving them dough, because either you're a spender or you're not a spender. So if the American people believe that this Congress and this president are spenders, why should we support all this stimulus and another $50 billion on this and another $30 billion on that, when we believe, because we're dealing with spenders, that maybe it's just going to be throwing good money after bad?
Well, first of all, let's take a look at this. The president is paying for all of these initiatives. I mean, this really aggravates Republicans. I mean, Mr. Boehner said that, the bill that passed to keep teachers and firefighters and police on the street cost about $26 billion, but it was paid for by eliminating a tax loophole that encouraged companies to ship jobs overseas. Now, that just aggravated Mr. Boehner to death. He thinks that we should protect companies that ship jobs overseas, but that we shouldn't pay to keep teachers, firefighters, and police on the streets.
Well, that's one bill. What about the $815 billion stimulus and the $50 billion that he's now proposing for infrastructure, and the $30 billion for the small? I mean, on and on it goes. We're already pushing $1 trillion here.
Well, first of all, the president passed pay-go legislation. Second of all, all of these recent proposals are paid for. They're paid for by offsets on the other side, by closing tax loopholes.
The recent proposals he's focusing on, Doug, but we're already $815 billion in the hole in the first stimulus.
No, absolutely. And, I love listening to the Democratic talking points on this. They really demonstrate what their message is going forth in November. Their message is, don't look at what we're doing, focus on John Boehner, or if you're Tim Kaine, Jon Stewart, here's a keychain, and we're going to drive some car out of a ditch or something like that. If that's what their messaging is for November, it tells you Republicans are in pretty good shape, and we're optimistic.
I mean, Jon Stewart said that should not be the message. Sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Well, our message is that the Republicans drove us into the ditch. Megan, let me give you a statistic that most people don't know. When this president came into office, he inherited a $1.3 trillion deficit. Now, Doug can't dispute that. Today, the deficit is $1.3 trillion. This president has not added to the deficit. He has found ways to lower spending.
No, he has. The deficit's gone up 26% since he took office.
You're talking about long-term debt projections. I'm talking about the deficit. The fact is that he's asked for a freeze. He proposed a freeze on non-security discretionary spending. He's asked for a rescissions bill to be passed so he could send cuts to the Congress that they would have to disapprove. So this president has done more to try to get control of spending than any president since President Clinton.
I got to go.
Megan, let's just point a historical lesson. In 2006, Democrats took over the House. They took over the Senate. So they can't claim that they didn't have anything to do with this. If the DNC wants to argue that they're underdogs, when you control the House, the Senate, and the White House, you're not underdogs. You're the establishment. All
right, guys. Interesting debate. It was fun having you on. I hope you come back. Thanks so much.
Always.
Thank you so much.
All the best. Well, coming up, Studio B with Mr. Shepard Smith in about 19 minutes. Hey, Shep.
Thank you, Megan. Coming up at the top of the hour, there are some sheriffs in one state who say they need to know what medicine you're taking. If you're taking strong painkillers or controlled substances, they want a list of everybody there. They say they can stop so many of the drug problems and make sure the right people have the right drugs. Of course, that's not okay.